Good morning, I'm Bob Jacobs from the Office of Communications, and thank you for taking time out of your morning to join us here at NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C. Before we meet our new administrator and give him a chance at talking with us today, I want to give you the opportunity to participate through your mobile device if you'd like to. All you have to do is go to www.nasa.gov/townhall. That will take you to a prompt screen where you put in the password TH 2018 exclamation point. You type in your field center where you're typing the question from, and then you'll either have the opportunity to vote up questions that are already in the system or write your own question, and we'll take it from there. You may remember just a short time ago that not only did the President nominate an administrator, but the U.S. Senate confirmed him. In fact, it was just here at NASA headquarters on April 23rd that Vice President Mike Pence swore in Jim Bridenstine as NASA's first administrator. Before joining NASA as administrator, he began his federal service in 2012 as congressman of Oklahoma's 1st District. And before that, he began his federal service in the military as a pilot, where he flew various aircraft, including F-18s, conducted more than 300 carrier landings, flew more than 1,900 hours. But now we have him as administrator, so please join us in welcoming our 13th Administrator, Jim Bridenstine.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bob, for that introduction. Thank you all for taking the time out of your day to be here. What an honor. Bob, I know it's not easy to put this together. I know you and your team have worked for at least a week making sure all this goes well. Now we just got to make sure the talent does okay. But it's also true that there are centers all across this country that are also watching. And of course, it's on NASA TV and other places. So there's been a lot of work that went into making this happen, and I didn't want this to be disruptive, and I'm sorry that it is, if it is, for those who were important in putting this together. But I wanted to have an opportunity 3.5 weeks into the job to make sure that I was reaching out to the workforce and talking to the people that I am now charged to lead for this critically important agency for the United States government. So I want to start by saying it's a true honor to be here. In the 3.5 weeks I've been here, I have been overwhelmed by the kindness of all the people that I've met. I've been absolutely overwhelmed by the grace as I'm learning on the job 3.5 weeks in. And I've been overwhelmed at the number of people who have opinions that they want to share with me. I'll tell you, this is not an agency that is shy. It's not an agency that is shy or short of people who have important ideas that they want to share with me. And I want to be clear, I embrace that and I love it. I said this when I got sworn in. I feel it today as I did then. NASA is a family. I've heard that an overwhelming amount of times. Welcome to the NASA family. And you guys have been great. So I want to tell a couple of quick stories. Since I've been here, we've had some big announcements, one of which was the Mars helicopter. And of course, before we made that announcement, I wanted to delve into it, learn about it, understand it more and more. It was a program that has been championed by a friend of mine in the House of Representatives, Chairman John Culberson. He's the chairman of the Commerce, Justice, Science Appropriations Subcommittee. He's been a mentor of mine in the House of Representatives, and he's been advocating for this Mars helicopter for a long time. So in my early days here, Dr. Zurbuchen comes in and he says, hey, I've got an idea, and I think we're ready to go with it, and it's the Mars helicopter. And I said, well, that's fantastic, because I know the person who's responsible for funding NASA in the House of Representatives wants the same thing. So let's do this. I called John Culberson, and I told him that this was going to happen. And he said to me, there's one person you need to know about. And I said, okay, well, who's that? He said, it's a gal named Mimi Ong. She's the program manager for the Mars helicopter. And he said, you need to hear her story. She is an amazing story, not just for NASA, but for the United States of America. This is somebody who grew up in Burma, now Myanmar. They had no running water. They had no television. She had an opportunity at age 16 to come to the United States of America. She now works for the single best agency in the federal government to work for, as evidenced by 6 years of surveys, that being NASA. And she runs a program that, when I sent a tweet about it, got thousands and thousands and thousands of retweets. She is a great American story leading a critically important project. And of course, she's on the National Academy of Engineering and other things. If I went into her resume, we'd be here all day. But the chairman of the Commerce, Justice, Science, Appropriations Subcommittee wanted me to know about this person. I looked her up, looking at the Mars helicopter. This is one example of so many people at this storied agency who have done amazing things. I also started learning about these pilots, this ice bridge program that we run to make sure we're getting the best earth science for not just the United States of America, but for the world. And this requires our amazing pilots at this agency to fly over the North Pole. As somebody who's a pilot myself, I've flown in the Northern Pacific. I know the dangers that are involved in flying at those latitudes, the dangers of, you know, if you go into the water, you've got literally seconds to live, and people are taking this kind of risk to get critical science data that will inform decisions for decision makers, not just for this country, but for the world. And NASA does that through the Ice Bridge program that I was reading about. My point is this. 3.5 weeks here, I am convinced that this is the greatest agency to work for. And I am absolutely convinced that every one of us in this room and people who are watching on television, we all hit the jackpot when we got offered a job here. And I want to make sure everybody knows I don't take that lightly. It is critical. And it's because of you. You're the reason that this is the agency that is perceived in that way. And this workforce is, we all have different backgrounds. We all have different histories. Some of us come from different countries. And this is an agency where we want to make sure that that inclusion and diversity continues. And as I'm on the subject, I'll just say, for all the leaders and the managers that are here, as long as I'm at the helm of this agency, there will be no discrimination based on race, religion, sexual identity, sexual orientation, ethnicity, national origin, or anything else. But the good thing is, there hasn't been any of that since I've been here. I haven't seen it. And we want to make sure that it stays that way. What an amazing agency. What an amazing opportunity. And I'm thrilled to be here. And Bob, if it's all right, I'll just let people start asking questions. And I want to be clear before I start. 3.5 weeks isn't very long. If I don't know something, I'm going to be very honest about it. And I look forward to hearing what your thoughts are, and certainly addressing thoughts and concerns of the agency. So thank you.
Okay, I know we'll have some questions here at headquarters. As the administrator mentioned, we're typically not shy, so if you have a question, raise your hand. I think we'll get a couple of icebreakers going electronically here first. And, well, they're icebreakers, but they're, you know, again, we're not shy about sharing.
Oh, bring it.
So the first one is, and it's from headquarters, and that is, what do you think specifically qualifies you to serve as NASA administrator?
Wow.
Thought you were going to throw a snowball, right? No.
So I'll just share with you some of my background, some of my history, and then you guys can make your own determinations. So I grew up in Arlington, Texas. When I was in high school, I moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma. Graduated high school from Jenks High School. Went to Rice University for college. I had 3 majors at Rice: economics, business, and psychology. And when I graduated with those majors, I was looking at maybe taking a job in investment banking. I had some good offers in consulting and other things. But I'll be honest, none of it was for me. And this was a tough decision that I made in my life. When I was young, 6th grade, I went to a summer camp. It was a 1-week summer camp where I had the opportunity to play with a wind tunnel for the first time in my life. Didn't even know what a wind tunnel was, but my parents knew that I had an interest in aviation. When I was 5 years old, I made a picture of what I wanted to be when I grew up, and it was a picture of an airplane with me standing, and I had this little hat that I thought pilots wore. When I was in 6th grade, I went to this summer camp about wind tunnels, and I learned about Bernoulli's theory, and I learned about the camber of a wing and these kind of things. And at that point in 6th grade, plus the movie Top Gun came out, if you're familiar with that. But all these events in my life led to this decision from an early age that I was going to be a pilot. Period, end of story. I was going to be a pilot. So I'm going on these job interviews. I had really very little interest in doing a lot of the things that I was interviewing for. And I called my dad one day. And my dad's watching this on NASA TV. Dad, hi. I called my dad one day and I said, I'm doing these interviews. I've got good offers. I don't want to do any of it. And my dad said, well, what do you want to do? I said, well, the same thing I wanted to do my whole life. I want to be a pilot. And my dad, of course, my dad was involved in helping pay for my undergraduate education. And he said, well, you better go talk to the recruiter because he didn't want to pay any more. But that was perfectly okay with me. Military service has always been something I was interested in as well. I joined the United States Navy, became a pilot, flew off of aircraft carriers. I was on the USS Abraham Lincoln primarily. I started off in the E-2 Hawkeye. I flew combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. In the Hawkeye, we did a mission called Airborne Battlefield Command and Control. So planes would take off the aircraft carrier and other places in the theater. And once they got airborne, they were under our control. And we had to make decisions, targeting decisions, getting the right bomb on the right target with the right guidance system, and orchestrating a tanker plan to make sure that our pilots could get to the target and get home. And all of this was done from an airborne platform. So I did that for a number of years. Of course, we got back from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. I had the opportunity to transition from the E-2 Hawkeye to the F-18 Hornet. And I flew F-18 Hornets for 3 years at the Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center, which is the parent command to Top Gun. And during that time, I had the opportunity, I flew Red Air. So my job was to study how the enemies of the United States fly in combat, and then fly those profiles with the intent of being shot down by Top Gun instructors. So I was a target. So for 3 years, I had the opportunity of doing that. And I got shot down a lot, which means that your country is doing really good things on the national security side of the house. Of course, getting shot down isn't a bad thing, because then you get to fly home at under 500 feet and faster than Mach, which is always a good time. But you got to remove yourself from the problem, and that's how we did it out there at the Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center. So I did that for 3 years. 2007, in this time, I married my wife, Michelle. We had our first child. We decided that it was time to leave the United States Navy. And so I went to Cornell to get an MBA. While I was doing that, I worked for Wiley Laboratories down in Orlando, Florida. So it was an executive MBA. So 2 weeks at the beginning of every semester, I was in Cornell. Every other weekend, I was at Cornell. And of course, during the weekday, I had a full-time job doing acquisition of training systems for the United States Navy, primarily flight simulators. During this time, my wife's father had passed away. Her mother got multiple sclerosis. We had this huge burden to move back to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where her family was. We did everything we could to move back there. I got a job at a nonprofit Air and Space Museum, the Tulsa Air and Space Museum. And I had the opportunity to see firsthand, just like when I was that little child, inspired by the wind tunnel, I had the opportunity to see firsthand other young children, elementary school children, coming to the Air and Space Museum. Quite frankly, many of them receiving grants from NASA in order to come, because a lot of these children would not have been able to afford the $10 to get in the door. Getting grants, and the grants don't directly come from NASA, but NASA is involved in those kind of educational programs. And I saw firsthand lives change the way my life had changed. And I think that's a critical piece of what NASA is and what NASA does. So I had the opportunity to participate in that for a number of years. And then I was in the Navy as a reservist, flying E-2 Hawkeyes again, doing counter-drug operations down in Central and South America, which was an amazing experience. I will say that during that time, I'm going to delve into politics here a little bit, but very bipartisan. During that time, there was a challenge with the federal government, and what ended up was the sequester on defense specifically. It was all discretionary spending, but defense was half of the discretionary budget of the United States government. And in that sequester, my squadron got eliminated. My squadron was responsible for busting about $2 billion worth of cocaine every year on the high seas. My squadron was involved in preventing all that cocaine that was resulting in the cash. Remember, it's not just the cocaine coming to the United States, it's the cash going to the transnational criminal organizations down in Central and South America who are getting more power than their governments, which is not stable for the world. And so I made a determination at that time to run for the United States Congress, and not really believing that there was much of a chance to win. I had no name ID and no money. We worked really hard, had a great team, and with the help of so many people, we ended up winning an election. I get to Congress. This is way more than this person ever wanted to know, I'm sure. But I'm introducing myself. So I get to Congress, and I'm on the Armed Services Committee, which I worked really hard to get on, Strategic Forces Subcommittee. So the Strategic Forces Subcommittee, the Armed Services Committee, deals with all of our national security space-based capabilities. So we're dealing with the GPS system and the Advanced Extremely High Frequency Communication System and WGS for over-the-horizon communications. These are all systems, of course, that I used as a Navy pilot, but I wasn't involved in necessarily building or producing, but technology that I relied on. Of course, all of the remote sensing and imagery, and of course, the military has its own weather capabilities, DMSP, satellites. So I got involved in those kind of capabilities. I really got involved in the communication architecture for the United States of America because I had been involved in I would say, contingencies where I needed a certain type of space-based over-the-horizon communication capacity that wasn't available, and what was available did not match the antenna that was on my aircraft. In other words, we had a KU-band antenna, and we didn't have KU-band capacity to feed my aircraft. So I got involved in that. So that's on the Armed Services Committee, Subcommittee on Strategic Forces. Then I was on the Science Committee, Subcommittee on Space, which oversees NASA, so I got involved in NASA issues. And I ended up as the chairman of the Subcommittee on the Environment, which oversees NOAA. And a lot of people don't realize it, but here in this audience, people know. NOAA is involved. I mean, 40% of NOAA's budget is space-related activities. And as the congressman from Oklahoma who has constituents that die in tornadoes every year, I got very involved in NOAA's capability to predict weather, especially as it relates to tornadoes. The JPSS satellite, which I know NASA builds for NOAA, was one of the programs that I oversaw, GOES-R and GOES-S, which are now in orbit. I was involved in those programs on the congressional side of the House. And so I've been involved for 5.5 years now in these space-related activities, to the point where it seemed like in Congress the only thing I was dealing with was space-related activities for the United States of America. And a lot of the challenges that I saw were interagency challenges. So you had NOAA doing one thing and NASA doing something and the Department of Defense doing something and the intelligence community and the FAA and Commerce, and everybody's working on their own kind of space-related activities, but not a whole lot of interaction. And they're all trying to solve the same problems with their own budgets and their own basically unique solutions. So a couple of years ago, my staff in Congress, we started working on a very comprehensive space reform bill. How, if we're as a nation, how do we as a nation move forward with a comprehensive space strategy? And we put together a bill, a very long bill, a very detailed bill. Some people would say it's a laundry list. But what it does is it takes into account all of America's space enterprise, and we put together this very robust bill. Now, I knew when we introduced the bill, it's called the American Space Renaissance Act. I knew when we introduced that bill it was never going to pass the House of Representatives. It was never going to pass the Senate, and here's why. It touched every single committee in the House. We had tax provisions in there, so it touched the Ways and Means Committee. We had issues in there for the FAA, Office of Commercial Space Transportation, so it touched the Transportation Committee. Of course, it touched the Armed Services Committee in a major way, and it touched the Science Committee. It touched all of these committees in the House, and for those of you who are familiar, and I know some of you in this room are, getting a bill through one committee is hard, almost dang near impossible these days. Getting a bill through all of those committees and then through the entire House and doing it in both chambers and that's very difficult, especially when it touches all these committees. So what we decided to do strategically is take all of these best space reform ideas that we determined were important for the country and start packing them into other bills. And so if we knew a bill was going to pass, the National Defense Authorization Act, defense appropriations, omnibus bills, certainly FAA authorizations and NASA authorizations, we would take provisions of the American Space Renaissance Act, which we believed was the best repository of space reform ideas, and we would take provisions of that bill and start putting them into other bills. So that's really the background that I have in space, and then ultimately that got seen by a lot of members of Congress, and it got seen by folks that were trying to determine who would be a good NASA administrator, and that began the interview process and ultimately the confirmation process, which I apologize it took so long, but we got here. So that's the story. Now you guys can determine if I'm qualified or not based on the question. I hope that answers that person's question. I will tell you this. There are amazing people all over this agency that I'm going to be relying on. And I am under no illusions that I have all the answers. But I'll tell you this, the people that I've met at this agency are absolutely brilliant. They're exceptionally diverse in their viewpoints. And believe me, I've heard a lot of them already. And I can't wait to continue learning more and prove that, that I am up to the challenge. So thank you for the question, and we'll go on.
Okay, before we come to headquarters, one more easy one. Because it's about climate change. No, it's really... Yeah, we'll see if I'm working here now. It's from JPL, and they want to know how your position on climate change and climate monitoring has changed, what your position is specifically, and they add to it your thoughts about the CMS, the carbon monitoring system that has just been recently mentioned there, and things like canceling, the proposal to cancel the latest OCO mission.
Sure. So the latest OCO mission, OCO 3, I'll hit that one quick and then revisit some of the others. So the Orbital Carbon Observatory Mission 3, number one, OCO 2 is on orbit and doing well. OCO 3 is still being developed by NASA, and my understanding is in January we're going to launch it. Now, it was not in the President's budget request, but it was funded by Congress. The President signed the bill into law, and we're following the law, and we're going to launch it in January of 2019. So it's not been cut. In fact, it's going to be on orbit very, very soon. So I think that's an important point. As far as my position on climate and how it's evolved, I'll be very open, and I'll share kind of the story here. I guess it was 2013, there were 24 Oklahomans that got killed in a massive tornado. Me being a member of Congress and wanting to do something to help my fellow citizens in the state of Oklahoma, and I want to be clear, that was a big event, but every year I've been in Congress, I've had constituents get killed in tornadoes. And every year in Congress, I've made a commitment to my constituents that we're going to do everything we can to prevent deaths from tornadoes, and in fact, my objective is to move us to a day where we have 0 deaths from tornadoes in the United States of America. So I started promoting a bill, the Weather Research and Forecasting Innovation Act, which actually started in 2013, passed in 2017, if you can imagine. That's how hard it is to pass bills in in the House and the Senate and get them signed by the president. So I started working on that bill. Now, in the debate, there was a moment where I said these words. I said, temperatures quit rising 10 years ago, but here's what I know. My constituents this year will die in a tornado. Let's allocate resources where we can save lives and property today. Now, of course, after that, and by the way, that 10-year timeline there, I pulled that from the NASA website. But after that pause, it started going up immediately, like the next year, right? And now there's this spike, and then for the last 2 years, it's gone down a little bit. But here's the point: I don't deny the consensus that the climate is changing. In fact, I fully believe and know that the climate is changing. I also know that we human beings are contributing to it in a major way. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. We're putting it to the atmosphere in volumes that we haven't seen. And that greenhouse gas is warming the planet. That is absolutely happening, and we are responsible for it. NASA is the one agency on the face of the planet that has the most credibility to do the science necessary so that we can understand it better than ever before. And maybe to allay the concerns of the person who asked the question, I would like to share this. If you look at the president's budget request for 2019, his budget line for earth science is higher than 3 of the budgets that were passed by President Obama. And if you look what was passed into law and signed just a couple of months ago in the omnibus bill for earth science, it's the second highest earth science budget in the history of NASA that the president signed into law. Here's what I'll tell you from my perspective. We need to make sure that NASA is continuing to do this science, and we need to make sure that the science is void and free from partisan or political kind of rhetoric. And to do that, what we do and what we have been doing, and I know Thomas Zurbuchen has been focused on, is following the guidance of the National Academy of Sciences. And of course, we had a new decadal survey that came out in 2018. It came out in January, if memory serves right. And we're going to make sure, and I've told Thomas, and of course Thomas is telling his folks, we're going to put together an architecture that follows the guidance of that decadal. And that decadal has a series of things that are critically important to understanding the Earth for human society at large. And it starts with the idea that the water cycle and the energy cycle are coupled, and we need to make sure that we're understanding how that affects the changing climate. It talks about how ecosystems are changing. That's the number 2 thing. We're gonna focus on understanding how ecosystems are changing based on how we as humans are changing the climate. It talks, and this is important to me, the guy who represents Oklahoma, it talks specifically about extending weather forecasts and air quality forecasts and improving those weather and air quality forecasts, which is something I've been working on as a member of the House of Representatives. It talks about understanding climate in general. I think the way it frames it, we're going to reduce climate uncertainty is how the National Academies framed it. And of course, 5 was sea level rise, and 6 was geological disasters and hazards. So we have guidance from an apolitical, nonpartisan National Academy of Science telling us what is important for humanity, and we're going to follow it. And I intend to do that. Now, I've got so much more to say, but I know there's more questions. But thank you for that.
Let's go for questions here at headquarters. Come on, you've had a couple that were, over there, right in front.
Hi, is it afternoon? I think it is. Good afternoon, my name's Ken Costello from the NASA IV&V facility out in West Virginia. And my question is kind of about human spaceflight and risk. As an agency, we've spent a lot of years sending people into space and taking risk. I mean, we are a risk-taking kind of agency. I think a lot of the lessons that we've learned over that time perhaps has also put a fear into us about doing certain things. At the same time, we're looking at involving ourselves more with these commercial partners. they don't necessarily have the same background, and while they have access maybe to a lot of the same information, their risk posture seems a little different. Like, for example, on SpaceX, wanting to use load and go with the astronauts already loaded on board the spacecraft is maybe a little more risky than what NASA has done in the past. And so really my question to you is, I mean, how do you view risk in human spaceflight, compare, where we are, where the agency is, and where the commercial partners are, and how do you think we should go about balancing those things to achieve what I think we all want to do, is to get back to human spaceflight?
Oh, it's a wonderful question, and it's a very important philosophical question that that the administration and I and all of us have to deal with going forward. So thank you for that. Everybody knows that space flight is risky. It just is. Now, what we have to do is we have to make sure that we mitigate and eliminate as much of that risk as possible. As a Navy pilot, every day on the aircraft carrier, we would eat dessert. Why did we eat dessert? Because it could be your last dessert. And right before you launch off the end of the carrier, in the briefs, we would hear people say, I would hear people say in the briefs, that our number one mission today is safety. Well, actually, if it was, we wouldn't be hurling ourselves off the end of the aircraft carrier. And we certainly wouldn't be trying to fly back and land on it. So that's not the number one mission, but it is a critical component. Here's why human spaceflight safety is so important to this agency, more so than any other agency. Human flight in general is important for safety, and of course naval aviation is important as well. But for this agency, it's critically important for this reason. If we lose a single astronaut, the entire world stops. That doesn't happen in any other aviation endeavor. The President of the United States will be informed. His world will stop if we lose an American astronaut. He'll be on TV giving speeches. The presidents of countries all over the world, they're going to stop as well. And of course, because it's so international these days with our partners in the International Space Station, it becomes a globally very difficult place to navigate. And not does it just stop the world politically and economically and everything else. What it also does is it stops this agency from continuing to do amazing things as we do reviews and investigations and studies, and then ultimately years later we might get back to returning to space with humans. That's why we are different than every other aviation endeavor that currently exists. It is also true, and I think I took this away from your question, if we are going to put even a single human at risk, we have to be doing something that is monumental and critical for the United States of America and for the world. And so that's what we're doing right now. We're putting together concepts for getting back to the moon and then on to Mars. And I know there's a lot of people in this room very involved in the Journey to Mars program. Like, a lot of that's going forward. My direction in Space Policy Directive 1 from the President of the United States is to get us back to the moon and to Mars. We're doing both, and we're doing them at the same time. And as many of you in the room know, the President wants it on budget and under time. And he's going to hold me accountable to that, which means I'm going to hold you accountable to that. So that's the vision, is if we're going to put anybody at risk, we've got to be doing something that's critically important for the world and critically important for the United States of America. So I understand that concern. It's a philosophical challenge that this agency has been dealing with for a long time. And it does also, I think you alluded to it in your question, it puts the future programs at risk as well. You know, there was a time during Apollo 1 when we lost 3 brave astronauts during a test that Congress turned against the Apollo program in general. We had a great leadership from James Webb and the President of the United States, and they brute forced their way to convincing Congress, and I don't know how many votes it came down to, but they continued the Apollo program by a slim margin, and ultimately we landed astronauts on the moon. And we won the space race. going down back to your point, I'm going to hit on this for a second. I know there's more people that have more questions. Why this is so important. We landed humans on the moon, and people said, okay, why does that matter? What are you doing now? It was footprints and flags, and the end was 1972, and we came back and nothing else happened. Why did we do that? It was a lot of money, a lot of risk. People lost their lives. Why did we do that? I'll tell you why we did that. Because it established, in an era where we needed to establish it, it established the fact that America has an economic and a political system that is second to none in the world. That's what it established. And why did that matter going forward? As the Cold War heated up, we ended up in a situation where we had mutually assured destruction. And the President of the United States at one point said, you know what, we're going to do the Strategic Defense Initiative, and we're going to make sure that if anybody launches a missile on us, it doesn't hit our shores. And people disregarded it, said it's not technologically achievable. We don't have the money to do this kind of thing. The Strategic Defense Initiative will never happen. People in this country were saying that. They made cartoons and they called it the Star Wars program. Of course, the President of the United States embraced the Star Wars program, and he called it the Star Wars program. Yes, we're going to do Star Wars. So here's why that mattered. Because while very little of that money ever got spent and SDI never materialized, here's what mattered. Our political opponent at that time, our competitor in the world, believed that we could do it. And they started expending massive amounts of resources and capital around the world trying to convince everybody not to partner with us because this is destabilizing for the world. The reason our competitor at the time did that was because they had seen what we did 10, 11, 12 years prior with the Apollo program. It was built on the credibility of human spaceflight, and it was a piece, maybe a small piece, but it was a piece to finalizing the Cold War 10 or so years after that. That's why human spaceflight matters. It establishes technological and economic and political achievement that is unique in the world. And that's why we do this. So I think it's important that we understand, yes, we are taking risk. Yes, we are going to absolutely do everything we can to mitigate that risk. But at the end of the day, the risk is worth taking because our country is that important. Thank you for that question.
We have a semi-related question, and you touched on it electronically from headquarters, and that is, what do you see the role of the new National Space Council, as some people here have expressed concern that it could be the NASA Space Council?
So it's a great question. So as a member of Congress, I've been working on space issues for 5.5 years, in many ways feeling like I'm pushing a rope uphill. And I say that because trying to pass bills is much more difficult than doing something by a directive from the president. So what I have seen, and so some of the things that I've seen that have come from the National Space Council that I think are important are directives regarding non-traditional space activities. So when you think about, under the Outer Space Treaty, we have to provide as a nation authorization and continuing supervision for everything that we launch into space, whether it's commercial or government here in our country. And the question is, if we're launching human habitats commercially, how do we provide authorization and continuing supervision for that activity? And people around the world would say, we don't have the ability to provide authorization and continuing supervision. I mean, I'm going to talk way too much on this topic, but I'm going to do it anyway. How do we do that? And the answer is, we don't have an agency in the federal government that does that right now, specific to human habitats, or rendezvous and proximity operations for robotic servicing of satellites. And I know that's important to people in this audience. It's an important technology and capability for the United States of America to do robotic servicing of satellites. And in fact, it's important for the world because it mitigates some of the risk from the space debris problem that we have, especially in low Earth orbit and geostationary orbit. So whether it's human habitats, rendezvous and proximity, robotic servicing, maybe it's extracting resources from the moon, maybe it's mining an asteroid, these activities are non-traditional, and the question is, how do we provide authorization and continuing supervision? I have said as a member of the House of Representatives that in my view, authorization comes when the FAA gives you a launch license, and your continuing supervision comes when the the JSPOC, the Joint Space Operations Center in Vandenberg Air Force Base, when they do your conjunction analysis and warning, when they do that activity, that's your continuing supervision. So there's your authorization, continuing supervision. The State Department has everything it needs to defend its position in the world environment, that we have provided that kind of capability. Well, I will tell you, there was not consensus in the House of Representatives, nor in the interagency process, that that was the direction we should go, that we should just say, FAA, Office of Commercial Space Transportation, there's your authorization when you get a launch license, and JSPOC, when they do conjunction analysis and warning, there's your continuing supervision. There was not consensus that that was enough authorization and continuing supervision. So we started developing bills for how do we establish what the standard is, not just for the United States, but because the United States leads. And if we lead, the world will follow. So what are the standards that we as a country want to establish? And of course, doing iteration after iteration of bills on this, it takes years, and guess what? We still haven't passed anything. Well, the National Space Council meets once, they declare that we're going to solve this problem, and now all of a sudden everybody and they declared that they're going to do it through the Commerce Department, and they're going to move parts of the Commercial Space Office under NOAA, or NOAA's CISRA, Commercial Remote Sensing Act, that office. They're going to move it up under the Secretary of Commerce, and they're going to do all of these non-traditional space activities under Commerce, and that's going to be the single agency that provides the authorization and continuing supervision. They're going to put expertise there so that everybody in the world knows that we're leading and that we are being responsible in space. Like, I've been wanting to do this forever, trying to pass bills to make it happen, and no offense to members of Congress, but a lot of them are lawyers, and they don't I'm going to be in trouble, I get it. They're not interested in this, and a lot of them don't care. So as a member of Congress, I was pushing that. Now the National Space Council puts it in a space policy directive that the president pushes out the door, and all of a sudden we can have movement. So So here's where I see the National Space Council fitting, and that is, it fits because we have lacked on space an interagency process at the highest level specific to space. So the first time I went to a National Space Council meeting, I see the Director of National Intelligence, the Assistant Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of Transportation, the Secretary of Commerce, the NASA Administrator, the Vice President of the United States, sitting around the table discussing issues that I had in the American Space Renaissance Act that I've been trying to get passed for years in the House of Representatives. I was overwhelmed, blown away, and I said, this is going to be the greatest thing for the United States of America. So I love what they're doing. I think it's good for our country. I would also say that from meetings of the National Space Council, that they're going to take other important steps to include space situational awareness and space traffic management. That's going to have a lot of commercial space operators maybe a little nervous, but I'll tell you this, if you know anything about this administration and the secretaries that I just mentioned and your own NASA administrator, we're going to make sure that it's a very light touch regulatory environment. But we've got to make sure as new constellations launch into low Earth orbit, we're talking about constellations of thousands of satellites, multiple constellations of thousands of satellites for communications in low Earth orbit, it's going to get really crowded really fast. And we as a country, if we're going to lead, we have to make sure that we have good space situational awareness and good space traffic management. And that's another thing that the National Space Council is going to be moving out on. So from my perspective, and I've heard it from others here, that is the National Space Council the NASA Space Council? I've heard that. And I'll tell you, I know the Executive Secretary, Scott Pace, wonderful friend of mine. He's been a friend of mine for a long time. That is not what he wants to be. He wants to let NASA be NASA. He thinks this should be an interagency kind of place where at the highest levels of government we can make decisions that are important for our country. And that's how I see it. So I'm all behind it, and I have been since its announcement.
Okay, let's come back here to headquarters.
By the way, that's just the tip of the iceberg on that. There's so much more coming.
Again in the front section.
Anthony Gritz Savage, Goddard Space Flight Center.
Hi there.
Ever since 1958, every individual who has served as our administrator has had the opportunity to put their mark or their thumbprint on our agency. moving forward, what do you envision is going to be yours?
That's a great question. So I want to start by saying this isn't about me, and my thumbprint or my mark is not something I'm concerned with at all. What I want to make sure we do is we do the right thing, and we're going to do things somewhat differently given the direction that we've gotten from the White House, and of course, going back to the moon is a big piece of that. And of course, we're going to start with small, robots, and it's going to be commercial that's leading the way, and we're going to be a customer. And then at the same time, we're going to do larger landers so that we can actually do resource prospecting and eventually get to the point where we're going to be able to land humans on the moon again. So some of that will happen in my time here, I'm confident. Most of it will not. And I say that, I could be absolutely wrong. Maybe we're going to move out fast. So it could very well be that I'm at the helm when at least some of those activities for sure. But going beyond that, what I'd like to make sure we leave behind, and it's not me, I'm going to be really clear on this. We've had great leadership from Charlie Bolden. We've had great leadership from Robert Lightfoot. And of course, they've been pushing hard to make sure that we're launching American astronauts from American soil once again on American rockets. And that's the Commercial Crew Program. Now, that's likely to happen under my watch, and I want to be really clear. That is because people came before me, and I am not trying to take the credit. And I am grateful for their service to this country. My goal, and I appreciate the question, I think certain things will happen on my watch, but my objective is to make sure that people in this room and people that are watching on TV and people that are at the centers, they're getting the credit. I'm a steward of this agency for a temporary period of time, and this agency is so much bigger than me. If you look at James Webb, he was not a self-promoter. He was not trying to make himself the center of anything, but he got us to the moon. And if I have any ability to do half of what he did, we're going to be in a great place. So thank you for that question.
We're going to combine because a lot of the questions have the same theme, so my apologies to the people who submitted them if I don't ask them word for word. But one from Ames and Armstrong that kind of talks about and leans into your history as a pilot and interest in aeronautics. And given the recent news and the recent developments that aeronautics has made with the low boom flight demonstrator and the urban mobility, that could, someday lead to flying cars and all sorts of other exciting activities. What do you think NASA's role in aeronautics is?
Wonderful question. And this has huge implications for the economy of the United States and our competitive position in the world. And I really believe that, and I think it starts with integrating unmanned aerial vehicles into the national airspace system. That's something that we need to be leaders on. And I'm not, again, you talked about urban mobility. That's one piece of it. That's a small piece of it, which means we're going to need a whole lot of bandwidth in parts of the country that right now don't have enough capacity. So that's infrastructure that's going to have to be built. I want to be clear, that's not NASA's job, and we don't necessarily want to do that. Our job is research. Our job is science. Our job is, those kind of, what we don't want to do is be an agency that's responsible for air traffic management in the urban environment. But what we can do is we can inform the people who are responsible for that in an impressive way. And when you talk about integrating the national airspace, and we certainly don't want to be regulators. Like, the FAA is a regulator. That's not NASA's job either. Once we start getting involved in that activity, we end up being the regulator. We've got to be very careful not to put that in our wheelhouse. But if we can effectively create the technologies that ultimately enable unmanned aerial vehicles to be placed in the national airspace system, and even doing the urban air mobility kind of thing. So there's different pieces here. One is, how do you take a UAV from Los Angeles to Texas? How do you do that? And there's a solution there that NASA is involved in, and we're going to continue to be involved in. And then there's another solution, which is, how do you get from your home to work? So that's the air mobility piece. Each one of those is critical. I'll tell you, as a Navy pilot, when we move an unmanned aerial vehicle, a Predator or a Reaper. We have to pack it up and put it on a truck and drive it across the country for days, wasting a whole lot of manpower, a whole lot of time, a whole lot of resources, when for a fraction of the cost, we could just fly it across the country. Well, why can't we do that? That's what NASA's working on. And if we accomplish that objective, it will transform the American economy. It'll transform mobility across the country. The urban mobility piece, of course, is also important, and I fully support it. So I think that's a big piece. The low boom demonstrator, look, we've been plowing through the atmosphere at 0.6 Mach for 60 years now. And this is going to give us an opportunity to break that mold and fly across the continental United States, not just across the oceans, at much faster. And of course, everybody understands that time is critical to everybody in today's busy world, and this could enable some commercial partners to ultimately achieve an objective of getting us across the country faster. So what the Aeronautics Research Mission Directorate is doing is fantastic. I saw Jaywan here. I don't know where he is. But he's been, oh, there you are. Great work, and it's a great portfolio. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure J1 gets funded. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that my old friends in the House of Representatives and in the Senate are stepping up to the plate to make sure that we get those things accomplished.
Okay, let's come back here to headquarters. See if you know. Okay, question here in the middle.
Hi, my name is Doug Wong. I'm from NASA Johnson Space Center.
Hi.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good.
Hey, first of all, I want to thank you very much for saying all the nice things about the diversity and inclusion effort within NASA.
Yes.
Since I'm from NASA Johnson Space Center, we have a very solid employee resource group diversity inclusion program.
Yes.
And thanks to the leadership of our Center Director, Alan Ochoa.
Yes.
So my question is, under your leadership, how would you continue to promote the diversity and inclusion within the entire agency?
Absolutely. So, of course, I'm not at every center all the time, but I know we have selected great leaders. Establishing the tone from the top, I think, is critically important. I hope that I've done that here today. But then, of course, making sure that flows throughout the organization, the way we communicate, and then the way we establish the offices, as you've mentioned, that are making sure that it happens, and giving people opportunities to make sure that their voices are being heard, and allowing diverse dialogue when maybe somebody doesn't feel like their place is being properly adhered to in the NASA family. So certainly I understand the concern. I'm going to set the tone at the top, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that everybody, and I mean everybody, feels included. Here's why this is important. I think you hit on it. We have the best workforce in the United States government. We want to maintain that. And the only way to maintain that is to make sure that we are diverse and inclusive and tolerant. That's the only way. We want to attract the absolute best talent, and we want to retain the absolute best talent. Now, I will tell you this. I was talking to Al Condis the other day. He had a position that was open. And for one position, he put it on the web for just a matter of days, and he had over 400 applicants to that one position. Well, that means we're doing something right. So attracting talent is not a problem that NASA has. What we've got to make sure we're doing is making sure that we're attracting the diverse talent that ultimately is the best talent. And then just not doing that, but also establishing the tools to promote the best talent. Again, the goal is we need the absolute best workforce for the absolute best agency in the U.S. government. And I am committed to that. If you have ideas, I'm more than happy to have some one-on-one time and hear what your thoughts are. You bet.
Another one here at headquarters? Oh, there we come.
I'm Victoria Friedenson from HEO, and you mentioned resource prospecting, and I'd like to have your thoughts on the lunar economy, expanding commerce and industry beyond low Earth orbit.
What wonderful question. So when you think about Space Policy Directive 1 that came from the President of the United States. It says very clearly that we're going to go back to the moon, but he also put in there sustainably. So we got to make sure that it is sustainable. Look, this is the third time that we've put together a plan to go back to the moon. The first, I should say it's the fourth time. The first time was actually successful, Apollo, but we had like 5% of the nation's budget at that time. So how do we do it? And then the next two times ultimately got scrapped because of budget and priorities. How do we go back in a way that's sustainable? And that's why we need commercial partners, and that's why we need commercial to step up in ways that we haven't seen before. But here's the great thing. We have that now in ways that we didn't have in the last two times that we put together a program to get back to the moon. We have private capital being willing to step up and do exceptionally bold things and put their own resources at risk. Now, you mentioned the lunar economy. Cislunar, I think, is the direction we need to go, but the lunar surface, of course, is a piece of that. And the biggest thing that I think most people talk about, and you mentioned the prospector, is the water ice. We've got volatiles that we know are in at least tens of billions of tons at the poles of the moon, and that water ice represents, quite frankly, rocket fuel. I mean, if you take the water and you melt it and you crack it into hydrogen and oxygen and you put it into cryogenic form, liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen, you now have the same propulsion that powered the space shuttle, for example. So that exists on another world, and that other world has no atmosphere, which means you can launch off of it without the fairings and the designs that we have on planet Earth. I mean, you go back to Apollo and look what we took off the moon. It looks like it would never fly, and yet it launches off the moon, no problem. Why is that? Well, there's no atmosphere, and the gravity well is 1/6 that of Earth. So if we have that kind of capability to generate volatiles from the surface of the moon and then get those volatiles into cryogenic form in orbit around the moon, well, that could be a fueling depot. And this just isn't a concept of the United States of America. This is a concept of other countries around the world that seem to believe they can make it happen. Well, in my view, if they can make it happen, we ought to be making it happen first. And the only way to do that is to, and when I say first, I want to be clear, with partners. But the only way to do that is to make sure that commercial is moving with us for capitalization and ultimately being able to translate that into a market where people are using that basically fuel depot, if you will. And of course, I'm not talking in my term here as the NASA administrator. I just want to make sure. I'm not suggesting that we're going to move out on this and make it happen tomorrow. This is years and years down the road. But the idea is, imagine if you had a fuel depot in orbit around the moon, getting back and forth to that fuel depot, even to geostationary orbit, means that we're going to be able to maybe drive down the cost. So the next time you have a satellite that runs out of station-keeping fuel, instead of launching another $500 million satellite on another rocket that costs $100 million to launch, maybe we're able to fuel that satellite or give it some kind of station-keeping capability from lunar orbit. I know it sounds science fiction, and people out there might have strange things to say about it, but look, it can happen, and it's not going to happen maybe tomorrow, but it can happen, and we need to be thinking about this. This is a strategic concept going down the road. But in order to make that happen eventually, we've got to start today and make sure that we've got a robust commercial capability going back and forth to the moon and going back and forth from lunar orbit to low Earth orbit. And so I believe in those things. Now, you mentioned the economy. I'll mention a couple of other things. Some people have suggested, and I don't know, but there could be trillions of dollars worth of platinum group metals on the moon. And I've been trying to find out from a lot of people who knows what, and it seems to me that a lot of people don't know very much about that. Not that they don't know, but that they know it's possible, but they don't know what the quantities are or the locations. We have rare earth metals on planet Earth. Well, those rare earth metals are not earth metals at all. They're from asteroid impacts from millions of years ago. Well, each pot mark on the moon represents one of those same asteroid impacts that could be those rare earth metals, or I should say platinum group metals. And we need to be the ones to discover if that's still there. The great thing about the moon is that the geology is not active like it is on Earth. You know, when something impacts the Earth, it gets buried or it gets washed away, or we have a very robust water cycle and a very robust geology. Well, on the moon, if it hit there 1 million years ago, chances are it's still there. And so we need to be really smart about how we go about doing the research to find out what might be there for the lunar economy. I will also tell you that if there does happen to be potentially trillions of dollars of platinum group metals on the moon, which I'm not saying that I know that there is, because I don't, but if there does happen to be that there, and we're not the first ones to get it, it could change the balance of power on Earth, which is why it matters strategically for the United States of America to move to the moon with our partners in a robust way as quickly as possible. Others are doing it, we should too. Did I answer your question? Okay, awesome.
I want to be respectful of your time. I think we can do two more quick ones, both electronically. One from Goddard wanted to talk about, and we found ourselves in this position with other missions. This one's about WFIRST, where it has been eliminated as part of the president's budget, but yet there's funding for it. So they're wanting to know your thoughts about WFIRST and other missions like that.
That's a wonderful question. So it was eliminated in the president's budget. If you look at the mark that just came out of the Commerce, Justice, Science Appropriations Committee, and I think it has come out of the full committee at this point. I don't know if Mary D is here, but I think it might have come out of the full committee at this point. Bottom line is the House appropriators are looking at funding it, and I would imagine the Senate would probably follow. But when you look at the president's budget request, so I think WFIRST is going to continue to go forward. If I have a crystal ball, I'd say there's a 90% chance of that. But I would also say this on the president's budget request. Right now, if you look at the James Webb Space Telescope, it is eating a huge part of the budget, especially, again, going back to the decadal surveys. When we establish a decadal survey for the next, obviously, 10 years for astrophysics, and you have one mission, or I should say one satellite, that is not only taking up that 10 years, but going into the next 10 years and taking up a massive chunk of the money that we have available for astrophysics, that puts us in a position where the decadal surveys are not going to be as effective going forward because the next decadal is still having to deal with the previous missions that we started for the previous decadal. So when we think about WFIRST, we need to think about how we got where we are with the James Webb and make sure that we don't repeat that. And I know I've talked to Dr. Zurbuchen about this a lot. I keep referencing you, and I apologize for that, but he's good with it. So how do we prevent that from happening again? I'm going to tell you, I've got to be committed to preventing that from happening. If you know anything about this president, it's on budget and under time. And we've got to make sure that we don't do this again. So number one, we're going to go forward with James Webb Space Telescope. It's going to deliver the best science that we've ever had from an astrophysics perspective, and we're all looking forward to it. But with WFIRST, we've got to make sure that that doesn't happen to that program. And I would also say, as somebody who was on the Armed Services Committee, I love the idea of distribution of architectures and a disaggregation of capabilities. We do that in the Department of Defense for complicating the targeting solution of our enemies. But in this particular case, if we can do smaller missions with multiple satellites, then any one of them that runs over doesn't clobber the decadal, not only for this decade, for the next decade. So I do believe that there is merit to thinking about things differently going forward, especially considering that there's a miniaturization of electronics, there's an increased capacity of performance for satellites, and we might not need to do another, in the case of James Webb, another $8 billion project that goes through multiple decades. So I wasn't here when that decision was made in the president's budget request, but I'm presuming that was a piece of the decision. But I will tell you, for whoever asked that question, given what I'm seeing coming out of the House and the Senate, WFIRST will likely be funded, and it's going to go forward, and we're going to rely on Thomas Zurbuchen and his team to make sure that it doesn't go over cost or over budget.
No pressure.
Now you're on the spot.
One final question, and then we'll let you go back to your more pressing duties. And that's, from the time that you were nominated to the time that the Senate confirmed you, there was space. there was some distance. So the question to you is, was it worth the wait?
Absolutely. Without question. 3.5 weeks into the job, this is the best job I've ever had. Now, ask me 6 months from now, I might tell you a different story. But I don't think that's going to be the case. This is an honor of a lifetime. Every single one of you know what it's like to work here. I've now experienced it for 3.5 weeks. And I just can't tell you what a blessing it's been to me. It's a blessing to my family. And I can't wait to work with all of you as we continue to do the great missions of NASA and continue the legacy of this very storied agency. So thank you all so much.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.